Did I teach the Chinese everything they needed to know about corporate governance? I doubt it, but it's possible. Today on Zippy Point.
Quick Zips by Zippy Point.
Quick and dirty. I'm Brock Romanek. I'm a big fan of yous. So this bilingual webcast from Gibson Dunn, being done in English and in Mandarin, about how an unprecedented number of Chinese companies have been designated for the U.S. Commerce Department on their entity list, brought back some fond memories. So the scene is set about 2 decades ago. I just started to work for the corporatecouncil.net, and as part of joining that company, I actually sold them a new site that I just drummed up called greatgovernance.com, which covered about 20 governance topics in an FAQ format. You have to remember that 20 years ago, Sarbanes-Oxley was just enacted and not much was known about corporate governance. It wasn't a household term. Very few lawyers specialized in it, maybe half a dozen. So it certainly wasn't the province of corporate lawyers, securities lawyers everywhere like it is today. There weren't any books written on the topic. There were very few laws covering it other than Sarbanes-Oxley. The practices involving it weren't transparent. For example, only a handful of companies had corporate governance guidelines, at least as far as anyone knew, because very few of them had posted them on a corporate website. In fact, corporate websites were just fairly new and fairly rudimentary. Anyway, an acquaintance reached out to me and said that a delegation from the China Securities Regulatory Commission would be coming to DC and asked me if I could meet with them. I obliged, and I think we met somewhere on Georgetown's campus. I can't remember for sure. I should mention this was about 20 years ago, so our country had good relations with China back then. Things between that country and ours are quite different now than they were back then. So there were about 8 members of the Chinese delegation, my friend and me. And the members of the delegation were interpreters. One translated everything I said into Chinese, and the other translated everything that the other said into English. And the allotted time was 90 minutes, and I had a fairly comprehensive presentation planned. Well, I dug in, and right off the bat, I mentioned something about director independence in passing, and to make a point. And they stopped me to ask, what did I mean about director independence? And it soon became clear after a couple goes that they had no idea what this fairly simple concept meant. So I tried for about 30 minutes to explain it in a way that they could understand, and I failed miserably. So finally I mentioned that I had a set of FAQs written about this topic, about director independence, on my new site, greatgovernance.com, and they got very excited. So I left the conference room with a handful of them to go out to a desktop computer out in the hall, and I printed out a set of the FAQs related to director independence and brought them back in. And then they quickly shuffled this thin stack of papers among themselves. I don't know, there was probably about 20 FAQs about director independence. And they asked if they could translate that into Chinese, take that back home. And I said, sure. And then I offered all my FAQs to them, and they were so happy and ended the meeting right there. So I like to think that the entirety of greatgovernance.com got translated into Chinese 20 years ago and became the basis for some governance practices in China. I doubt it, but who knows? So I get just tickled thinking about it. Anyway, another fond memory I have is when I was at the SEC in the mid-90s, and I had some friends in the SEC's Office of International Affairs, known as OIA, within the building, and occasionally a delegation from another country's securities regulatory agency, their version of the SEC, would come into town. I would be informally asked to represent CorpFin and talk to them. So this is back when I rode my bike to work every day, and I mean every day, regardless of the weather. We only had one car in the family, and at that time, my wife kept the car because she had our young sons at home. And I rarely had a suit jacket in the office. So these meetings tended to be impromptu. The delegation was there, and suddenly they were asking questions that had a CorpFin flavor to them. So I would get a call to come upstairs. So I would have to scramble and borrow a suit jacket from one of my neighbors. And more often than not, I would go up to the meeting with a jacket that was 2 to 3 sizes larger than necessary. And it was just funny. And the delegations were always so nice, so excited to meet us at the SEC. And of course, there was always a group picture. So the whole thing really made my day. Let me know what you think.